Hello, everyone. It's great to be here at Config today. My name is Gábor, and I'm head of product design at Spline. If you don't know about Spline, it is a multidimensional design platform. But before we start, I would like to ask you, how many of you used any 2D design tools in your life? Please raise your hand if you did so. Oh, many people. And how many of you used 3D design tools? Wow, still a lot. All right. Hopefully we can get even more after this talk. So today I would like to talk about why we at Spline think that 3D plays an important role in the design process and why AI is also important for its future. And I hope you can walk away with some valuable insights today about this topic, where I can share you some concepts about the multidimensional design field. And I would like to start with my own story, how I got into it, and then walk you through its evolution so you can put it into its contemporary context. And after that, I'm going to deep dive into some practical workflow ideas and end it with a glimpse towards its future. But here I would like to thank my coworkers, Nikki, Caroline, Alejandro, Gonzalo, and Olive, who helped a lot to develop this content that I'm going to show. So let me start with my story itself. It all began in my childhood, and every morning I was playing around with the Lego bricks. And what motivated me was actually going beyond the idea of the blueprints, so I can come up with my own spatial structures and ideas to explore and solve something within this Lego bricks and the constraints they provided. And I feel like it's pretty similar to how we work nowadays with design systems. Sometimes we need to go and reassemble those instances in order to solve a problem, or go as far as detach those components and create or invent something new, like a new UX pattern. And around this time, I was also into playing video games, like The Incredible Machine, for instance. And this altogether inspired me to learn more about the design and how I could make my own games. So I became a freelance designer in my early teenage years. And around that time, I was opening some cool software like 3ds Studio Max, and I remember to the very day that this is how I felt the first time I opened it. I was pretty scared and intimidated by the UI and the complexities of it. But what helped me was that I looked up a tutorial how to remake an actual asteroid, and it helped me to learn the basic principles about this medium, and with that I could overcome my fear. And historically, we encountered many different problems within this field, and many of those problems require to think about them in 3D in order to be able to actually solve them. There were some great artists and scientists who were curious human beings, and oftentimes they had some crazy ideas, but sometimes these crazy ideas could lead to great inventions, like the mirror technique, for instance, which made it possible to project a real environment, like a spatial environment, onto a sheet of paper, so we can accurately represent it in two dimensions with the technique of linear perspective. And this just shows us that how we as humans were already thinking and solving problems in 3D for centuries. And if we fast forward to computer graphics advancements, I have to highlight Ivan Shatterland's contribution, where he showed how there could be a better way to interact with the interface and directly manipulate the objects on the screens with the help of a light pen. All of this later influenced things like object-oriented programming too. And with the evolution of computer graphics, you got technologies like WebGL, which made it possible to have even more wider adoption and accessibility of 3D graphics directly in your browser. And if we look at its evolution, there were many great new concepts and more sophisticated solutions like physics and particles. And all of that allows us to have even greater, richer ways to interact with the 3D content, and all of that accessible, again, from our browsers, today even on lower-end mobile devices. But the medium and the future of the medium is shaping right now. It is changing. There are new concepts like the Gaussian splats, for instance, which is a new kind of representation of the 3D in the space via this concept of the volumes. And how we traditionally know 3D might be entirely different in the near future because of these inventions. But this brings me the question, like, what is 3D anyway? For that, I would like to step back a bit here and think about what it is actually not. I can tell you that 3D is not confined to a particular style, and it is not only meant for illustration purposes. But more importantly, it is not just a trend, because 3D is something that is already surrounding us in many aspects of our lives, from the architectural spaces that we navigate daily. Probably many of you use the map today to get here to config, and they also rely on 3D technologies. And the games we are playing are becoming more immersive too. In fact, even some 2D games are oftentimes built with 3D engines, as it provides more flexibility for the creators. And then the entertainment industry is also contributing to the widespread of this medium and the evolution of it. But in many other aspects of our life, and in more more applied areas, 3D is supercharging them too, like healthcare. And if we think about this medium and the new solutions that are out there, we are actually starting to interact with this medium in a more spatial way too on platforms like the Vision OS. But why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to think in 3D, design and develop in 3D? And for that, I would like to actually analyze a more simple shape first, like a 2D rectangle. If you think about a 2D rectangle, you can connect its 4 points via some edges, and typically you can fill it up with a simple set of materials, which is consisting of colors, textures, maybe even a gradient, and you are typically looking at it from a fixed perspective. But if you compare it to its 3D counterpart, like a cube, yeah, it is a more complex geometry in itself, but with the complexity comes the flexibility that you are more allowed to actually explore these materials, lights, and shadows, and actually you are able to simulate them on the surface of this object. And with that comes the flexibility of viewing it from variable angles and perspectives, so you can compose your scene in a more spatial way. And all of this comes with the flexibility of providing richer interactions for this kind of medium. But why is it so hard? Complexity of 3D shouldn't mean that it should be harder than 2D. Typically, nowadays there are like products and services where you have them as like this. Sometimes you start with this more tactile, physical experience with them, but they are also being represented on digital spaces. And in order to have a more holistic user experience, to think through the full user journey, we need to think it through from the tactile experience to its digital representation. And talking about the tactile experience, sometimes you need to produce and design products that are manufacturable, right? And traditionally, there were CAD systems which were pretty complicated and hard to use. But today, you have tools and apps like Shaper 3D, which makes it much more accessible, intuitive, and easy to create for this medium. And then these products are oftentimes also being represented on 2D screens too, right? Like a typical example might be an e-commerce site, and there, the more traditional way is just showing a 3D product with a 2D image, which seems a bit counterintuitive. And it is more difficult to be outstanding this way because it's like a common pattern, everything looks pretty similar on all the platforms, and it's harder to relate to the product with this way. But with 3D on the web, you are able to create interactive product showcases, and with that, people can get more closer to the product and its capabilities in advance, which it just makes it possible that you are able to more likely to relate to it, and on the other hand, it could even decrease returns, as you don't need to see in advance what to expect, or actually you see in advance in more detail what to expect. And there are cases when you need to educate people about a complex topic. Like in this example by coastal banks, they had to educate their people about their digital banking offerings, and traditionally they did it through this more old-fashioned way by the website, where there was a bunch of text and images to explain and learn about this topic. But then they took a different perspective on this by introducing Coastal World, where they actually delighted the audience while they were able to learn about the complexities of this topic throughout these mini games and the spaces within which they could navigate. And altogether, this allowed them to have a solution where they could more easily memorize the nuts and bolts of this topic that they had to learn about. And in other cases, you might need to visualize complex data, like the temperature anomalies of global warming the past decades or recent decades. And this raw data is pretty hard to read, right? Like if you look at an example like this, While with 2D visualization techniques and data visualization techniques, it can be a bit more relatable and readable. But there are cases when 3D is just a better medium, because it allows you to visualize 2D information, but in its 3D context. So you are more able and capable to read it in its actual context, and with that, you can have an experience and an interaction that is more familiar from the real world, so it can be also intuitive, even though it's like more complex data, but can still be easy to use. And these examples that I have showed you are actually oftentimes built with pretty robust software and solutions, which has plenty of possibilities, but on the other hand, they are very hard to use. They are difficult to learn, and you need to actually be involved in lower-level coding. And the typical workflow might go like this. You might start with your design idea, and even in that space or that stage, if you design for multiple dimensions, you might need to use multiple software from 2D to 3D. And then there might be another software to actually prototype your idea. And for designers, it might be hard. They might need to hand it off to an actual engineer to then rebuild it in a game engine. And after that, there is lots of friction going back and forth between these steps to iterate on your concept. And when you are ready, you can embed it into an actual production-ready website or app. But wouldn't it be cooler if this could be more streamlined? And I can tell you that actually it can be. You should be able to go from your design idea straight to a production-ready experience, and prototyping should be optional in your workflow. And with tools like Spline, actually it's possible to achieve these kind of workflows. But let me dive a little bit deeper. How is all of that possible? So as I have mentioned, Spline is a collaborative design platform which is allowing you to create production-ready experiences in multiple dimensions. And it made it much more accessible and easy to use at the first place. So you don't need to code, and you can create these rich interactive experiences with it. And it has some more advanced capabilities too, like physics, for instance. When we launched this feature, I remember people were pretty skeptical about it, and they were asking us, like, are you building a game engine now, or what's the goal of building physics into this tool? But over time, actually, it was confirmed that people love these kinds of features because it's making it much more easier to create rich interactions with low effort. And this confirms this idea that sometimes these wild and crazy ideas might be not as crazy as they sound, because we are able to shape the landscape with them. But let me show you some more specific examples and multidimensional concepts to explore what are the further possibilities with this medium and Spline. So understanding the user needs is crucial for designing products that are not only functional, but people can emotionally connect with as well. And that's what Scale did on their hero site, where they introduced a more thoughtful usage of 3D. And under the fold, where more function was needed to, for example, explain their data structures, they included more detail in their 3D. And we also saw successful usage of product visualization from companies like Polaroid with Spline. And with 3D, you are more likely to be outstanding from the crowd. But even if you compare yourself to other 3D solutions, just because of the fact that there are more creative possibilities and parameters that you can play around with. And some of these products and services that can create like emotional connection, they can like elevate the value and the quality of it too. And that's what the Imagination Studio did on their landing page, where you are able to reorder the verbs and words that consist of their value proposition. And that way, they provided a memorable and like an impressive experience for those who visit their website. And there are cases when you might need to visualize products. And with the multidimensional approach, you can view at it from multiple angles, and with like added interactivity or depth of field, provide a more cinematic result. And talking about the interactivity, if you look at the Spline community, they amaze us every day. They are actually exploring new ways to interact with this medium, developing special kinds of game mechanics and interaction patterns, and all of that without the need to code. And there are many advancements right now around us within like AI, spatial computing, and with that, we as creators might need to evolve ourselves too. And it can be quite intimidating to get started within this field. But for actually demonstrate you a workflow that is showing how it is much more easier and capable today with tools like Figma and Spline, I would just want to walk you through this project that I prepared here. So the idea is that let's imagine that I got a brief from someone, that I have to make a meditation app, and for which I need to create some calming 3D visuals. And let's say that the target platform is a native iOS app. I can start using a tool like Spline, and creating within that should be as easy as in a 2D tool. You can just drag around a couple of rectangles and spheres. And if you need more complexity, you also have access to more advanced modeling capabilities or import an existing model too. And then you are able to just use the camera and the perspective to view it from different angles and give it into this more spatial composition. Well, what makes it more fun is actually providing some materials to make your objects visually more appealing. And traditionally, in 3D pipelines, you might need to have heavy shader coding to achieve these kinds of goals. But in Spline, it's just as easy as like blending together a couple of 2D material layers, which you might be familiar from other tools as well. And you have access to more advanced materials like the gradients, which can create these beautiful 3D gradients across your 3D shape. And then taking your scene to the next level is possible by adding interactions to it. Every object in the space can be interacted and animated, and you can add some easy-to-use events to it. But in this concept, let's just imagine that I wanted to rotate this scene around over time, so I added this simple transition event there. And after my concept is ready, I can embed it into other tools like Figma, for instance. I can grab the URL of the scene, and then I can actually directly embed it and integrate it into a Figma frame, where I prepared a 2D design tool, like the interface design, and then I'm able to validate and test my concept in an actual prototype where it is actually blended with the 2D UI and the 3D interactions. But the power of Spline is that you can actually go beyond the idea of the prototype, and you can take the exact same scene and then embed it even into a production-ready website, for instance, like Framer, by grabbing the same URL. But back to the original idea, my target platform was iOS, right? So for that, I'm able to grab the production URL, embed it into a native iOS app too, without the need to rebuild this 3D scene again. And this allows me to bring an experience where I can ditch these like traditional illustrations, which are more or less interesting in a sense, and make these more richer interactions and 3D experiences across my product or app. And with that, Spline can benefit from the native performance of these devices and also the multi-touch gestures that they might provide. But in some cases, you might want to go even a step further and go beyond the idea of the 2D flat screens and take it into like a spatial experience. And the Spline is like a multi-dimensional platform. We want to make sure that it is actually possible to embed all your scenes even into spatial-based operating systems like the Vision OS. Well, let me show you a couple of concepts. What does this mean to design and explore our ideas for this future medium? So on Vision OS, you have different modalities. And one of the simplest way to integrate a spline scene is actually embed it as into a window, which is more traditional in a sense. It's more similar to the apps that we know from the iPads or the 2D screens. But if you want to elevate your experience, you can actually represent them as volumes too. And with that, you are free to walk around. The exact same spline scene can be like explored in these multiple modalities, so you don't need to build them multiple times. And these volumes can be even attached to like 2D interfaces or screens, so you can expand the 2D information with 3D. And then if you want to open a portal to another world where your limit is kind of your imagination, you can bring the same scene into this full space where you have much more flexibility to explore even more. But then there is the question of like, how do you interact with this medium? And as these operating systems provide you a fully multimodal experience, like there is the case like when something is far away from you, you are just gazing at it, and like by pinching with your fingers, and you are able to grab them and tap them, even if it's in the distance. And with Spline, we make sure that all of the native gestures are compatible out of the box with a platform such as the Vision OS. By the way, all these scenes were also made with Spline, and it allows you to even explore your own kinds of ways to interact with this content. And there's this other approach where there's this more skeuomorphic approach to it, where you might need to directly touch and manipulate objects. It can cause like hand fatigue if you use this kind of approach over like a repeated time for the end user, but sometimes it's just a better way. It's more similar and familiar from the real world. And with that, you are able to uncover new patterns, create custom gestures, and explore some new concepts for this medium. And spatial computing is just scratching the surface of the future and what will be possible with it. And as you have seen, like 3D is becoming much more easier today to get started with at the first place. But there are still some cases when you want to create like a very sophisticated, rich 3D interactive scene. It can be actually slower. It can be slower to design for 3D than to 2D, just because of the fact that you need to think in the space, and in 3D, it is slowing you down. But with the evolution and kind of the rise of generative AI, it can actually streamline this process. At Spline, we believe that this shouldn't replace your creativity, but it should be a handy tool where there are technical difficulties, so it's more easy to start with at the first place. As these generative models will improve over time, it can probably help you to get started more easily. And so you can be as fast as in 2D design or even faster with these kind of solutions. And if you look at other research advancements like the Video 4D, it hints us towards a future where it will be even more easy to create these hyper-realistic, fully interactive 3D scenes with a breeze. That means that we don't need to have more like long production times and production costs. And these multidimensional design principles can be easier to start with at the first place. So we don't need to fear by learning from long tutorials and courses. What if I would have to highlight another concept here is the evolution of the diffusion avatars, which is showing us that how it is actually more easy to generate these fully interactive, realistic avatars, which will shape the ways we can communicate. And by making these kinds of things easy, we as creators could just focus more on the human factors and the creativity factors of our creation, so we don't need to fear this medium anymore. And yet there are many more research advancements and like all of these great inventions happening right now, and with that comes many different buzzwords too, from like AI to spatial computing. But my question here is like, how does all of this come together, and how does 3D relate to all of the buzz? And I can tell you that the world in which we live is inherently 3D, and we need 3D in order to understand and describe it. And as the advancements go on in the foundational generative models and in all of these like research and developments, 3D can be actually a perfect platform for driving these advancements. So to just recap about all of this, I would like to go back to this idea that in order to explore new ideas, don't forget your childhood memories, because going back to your childhood memories and embracing them, you can explore more likely these kind of multidimensional ideas, because this idea frees you to experiment and makes you more capable of inventing something new, something meaningful, just like the artists and the scientists did in the past centuries. And today 3D is everywhere. In fact, it was all the times, but going beyond the 2D flat rectangles and designing across dimensions is just much easier today, and it can unlock your creativity and provide you a wider spectrum of possibilities. Here I would like to highlight how great the Figma and Spline communities are. They're pushing the boundaries every day, what's possible within this medium. You are solving very hard problems and uncovering new patterns. And tools today are much more accessible, so I would recommend that if you didn't yet started within this like more multidimensional space and approach, this is a great time to be in right now. And for that, our team has prepared for you a set of resources that you can get started with and learn more about by accessing through this QR code. Thank you so much for listening, and see you around.